Hey all, Blake here with another video, and today I'm going to show you how to set up and properly use this Ziss Artemia Blender. As well as that, we're going to have a bit of a chat around, is it that much better than the DIY option? What are some pros and cons and some pitfalls to avoid? So let's jump straight into the video. So to get started, we'll unbox and set up this Artemia Blender, but really it's super simple. It's designed for beginners and everyone should be able to set it up within about 5 minutes. To get started, we have our stand, which we're just gonna use conveniently to set it up in. A few comments on the stand before we set it all up. The way that it's designed, there's a little nozzle that is under here. You have to squeeze your hand under to release the brine shrimp basically. And one thing I don't like about this particular setup is that that gap is pretty small. You might need to call in a small child to help you release your brine shrimp, but I do have a workaround for that. Next up, we have everything else that's involved. So we have a rigid piece of airline tube there. We have our bits and pieces here, we'll open up shortly. We have the main body of the Artemia Blender, which nests in that stand nicely. We have our lid that goes on the top, and we have our air stone here. We have our valve for the bottom of the blender to make sure that our brine don't fall straight out the bottom. We have a little air valve here to control the air flow into that air stone. We have a pipette, and you might be confused, there's a little red grommet on there, but we're gonna actually use that on our thermometer. So we get a nice little plastic case to keep our thermometer safe. And we got a nice high quality glass thermometer there. So immediately we can take our red little grommet off the end of our pipette. You're just gonna roll that down your thermometer, and that's gonna keep it in place for when we slot it right in this hole here in the lid, just like so. And now it hangs freely and it's gonna stay there forever. Next job we have to do here is take our rigid airline tubing and our air stone and place it on the end. If you're really struggling to get it on, you can apply some heat, take it over to the stove or dip it in some boiling water, and it will just soften the airline so that you can get the air stone on, but this one's gone on pretty well. Flip your lid upside down and there's a little connection just on the inside there that we're going to slip our rigid airline tubing over. Some people debate around the length of this airline, if it does a good job or if it doesn't. For me personally, I've found it to be pretty perfect so long as you apply it all the way up to the top. So don't get lazy with it. Make sure that you jiggle it all the way to the end of the little nozzle and all the way to the end of your air stone. And you should find that it sits just above the hole at the bottom there. So there's enough to let things through. It's not going to block up that hole, but it's also going to sit just above there so that any eggs can't get trapped down the bottom. While we've got that here, we will take our bottom cap here and we're just going to screw it all the way in. Keep in mind that these are also using those rubber O-rings or grommets, so don't ever do it too tight. Just sort of light hand tighten is perfectly fine. So we'll place our thermometer back in here, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So there is another hole in the top and you can use that to sit a heater in there, but for me this fish room stays nice and mild year round, so I do not do that. Next up, you'll just need to get your own airline tubing, connect it to your air system or an air pump if you have one. Put this little control valve in between that and the connection on the top of your lid right there, and then you'll be able to adjust the flow accordingly by just turning this knob. So now that we've got it all set up, and it didn't take long at all, we're ready to set up our brine mixture and start hatching our eggs. Now it might be a bit of a clue within the name that brine shrimp are going to hatch within salty water, so I'll give you some instructions on how to mix it up. I'm lucky that I live by a coastal area, so I just go and collect natural seawater. That may be an option for you, but if you're inland, then you might have to follow these instructions. This container here is going to be about 2 liters of water or a half gallon. So for that, I'd recommend 3 tablespoons of non-iodized salt. Unfortunately, you can't just go and grab table salt out of your kitchen and pour it in, because that iodine is going to impact your hatch rate. So a lot of people use reef salt or Himalayan pink salt. There's many options of non-iodized salt out there, so just find whatever one works for you and your current budget. Now we are ready to mix it in with some water, and if you're lucky enough to have tap water with just a decent amount of chlorine, nothing too crazy and no chloramines, you can actually just pour that straight in. The chlorine at the early stages will help to dissolve the outer shell of the brine shrimp eggs, and you might actually find that you have a pretty good hatch rate. Unfortunately, people like myself do have chloramine in our water, so I would dechlorinate that anyway. And similarly, if you've got an excess of chlorine, it might not gas off in time for the brine shrimp to hatch, and it might cause issues for you down the line. So it might be worth playing it on the safe side and dechlorinating that water. Before you fill it up for the first time, it's also a good idea to fill it up over a sink, because we just want to make sure that our little valve at the bottom isn't going to have any leaks and we've attached it properly. So now that we've got our water in here, it's time to talk about brine shrimp eggs, and depending on where you are in the world, you might have a few different options for sourcing them. I hear good things in America for the aquarium co-op brine shrimp eggs, but here in Australia I've been really impressed with the Blackwater Aquarium's range of brine shrimp eggs. Most recently I've been trying out these, which are the Tibet red eggs, and they have a really interesting red color and a 92% hatch rate after 24 to 36 hours. So I've found these guys to be really cool, really unique, and far better than other brine shrimp eggs I've tested in the past. But if you just want some standard coloration, you're not into the fancy red, they do also have a Bohai Bay egg as well, which is more that brown sort of color, which still have a huge hatch rate, I think around about 90%. Outside of that, if you want more of a global option, I have also used Ocean Nutrition's can of brine shrimp eggs before, and that might be some other option that you might want to experiment with. So with a container about this size, I'd tend to use about 7 teaspoons of eggs. About half a gram per litre is what we're gonna want to aim for. Now I'll just give it a bit of a mix. I'll just use my pipette because I've got it here in front of me. So I'll just put the lid back on, and now it's just a matter of attaching an airline hose to our little valve. So just take a small piece of airline hose here, we'll attach it to our Ziss control valve, and then attach it to the top of our hatchery here. And then conveniently, I actually have an airline right here that we can use, and we'll place that around the control valve. So something like this is obviously quite an aggressive flow. We wouldn't want to maintain that, especially once the eggs start to hatch, because what you're going to find is it's going to smash everything all together. Your brine shrimp will most likely have their limbs broken off, and they won't be able to swim or eat or do anything really, and they'll soon die off. So find a flow that's right for you. I find that it's best success actually with quite a low flow, just basically enough to keep the eggs off the bottom of the hatchery. Something like that is far preferable to me and what I've found when I've been hatching out brine. It's not too aggressive, it's just going to keep everything tumbling over and moving until it's ready to hatch, and then they'll sort of be able to manage their way around without getting smashed into each other. Now lucky enough, I do have a second hatchery right about there that has been running for about 36 hours now and should be ready to feed. So we'll head back there and talk about how to properly harvest your brine shrimp for feeding. So here behind me you can see my second brine shrimp hatchery, and then down the bottom here we have that beautiful orange color live baby brine shrimp. If you get up nice and close you can actually see them hopping around, but there is a few little notes you want to take into account before harvesting them out, before just instantly turning on this nozzle. Baby brine shrimp are actually photosensitive, which means that they'll want to swim towards a light source. So here I wouldn't really start to harvest this out immediately, because our light source here is at the top. What I would do in an ideal scenario is turn off this light and have a little torch or little light down here, so they're going to want to swim towards the bottom. Super convenient in this case that our unhatched eggs are floating, because we'll be able to separate the unhatched eggs from the baby brine, as well as discard a lot of this unused salt water in the middle. Some people like to rinse their baby brine shrimp, but I don't find it to be an issue, and I find that most of the fish will enjoy the salt and the extra minerals, and even my planted tanks haven't been adversely affected by the small amount of salt water that enters the aquarium. Then it's a matter of putting a small container at the bottom of the nozzle here, slowly turning it just to open up that valve. And then we've got a nice little serving of baby brine shrimp. that we can feed out to our fish. So now that we have our little vessel of baby brine shrimp, we take our pipette like so, take a little serving of baby brine shrimp just like that, and it's just a matter of squeezing it directly into our aquarium. So that's as easy as it is to hatch and harvest brine shrimp. Now let's head back to the table and talk a little bit about some pros and cons, some positives and negatives, and is it actually worth picking up this Artemia Blender over the DIY options available. Okay, so now that we know how to hatch out and feed brine shrimp, there are a few other tips for ongoing success. First of all is storage of your brine shrimp eggs. To maintain the best hatch rate, it's a good idea to keep them away from heat and humidity. So I like to store them in the freezer. Obviously your fish room, if you have a fish room, contains quite a bit of heat and humidity, so it's not the best place to keep them stored. As well as that, it might even be worthwhile portioning them out inside the home, because every single time you open up the packet in here, it is being exposed to humidity, so keep that in mind. So in terms of actual operation of the blender, I did notice a couple of things. First of all, you probably noticed the blender in use behind me didn't use the stand supplied, and that's twofold. First of all, as I mentioned, I found it a bit fiddly to get my hand in under here and release the brine shrimp. And second of all, I found that when using the stand on a level surface, we would have eggs collecting in these four corners here. Because it's not a fully rounded design and the way that the water circulates within, I just found there was a little bit of restricted flow in these areas, and you would have unhatched eggs collect. And the benefit of the hanger is that because I'm hanging them on wood that is slightly narrower than this gap here, it does slightly tilt like so. And the benefit of this is that I found that it greatly increased the amount of circular flow, and I no longer had collection in these corners. So if you are experiencing that issue at your home, I definitely recommend hanging them a go. Overall, I have found this a fairly easy piece of kit to operate, and I do think there are some benefits to this over some other options available. Now, what are the other options available? You can find some smaller kits available on eBay, and also there is of course the DIY option like this one here in front of me. Similarly, I have done videos on how to create the cheapest DIY brine shrimp hatchery, and it did work perfectly well as well. I operated this 3-bay brine shrimp hatchery for quite a while and never had any real dramas. These are 1.25 litre bottles, and this one here is a 600 milliliter bottle. But the main thing for this one is there's a little bit of DIY involved. You got to source these caps. If you wish to, you can source this acrylic stand here, or you can make your own out of timber. And overall, there was just some leakage with the caps. I had to really tighten them on, and I find that it's quite difficult to clean. Whereas the larger profile of this 2-litre Ziss brine blender is super simple to clean, and it just generally requires a bit of a rinse out every now and then, and that's about it. The upside of this obviously is it's far cheaper. It's modular, you can add as many as you want to it, rather than having to go out and buy additional kits. The other benefit that this DIY option has is that you can make it smaller. As I mentioned here, we've got a 600 milliliter bottle here, which obviously is a lot less than this 2-litre blender. We don't have to fill it up all the way, and that is true, but a lot of people just don't have the demand for this much amount of brine shrimp. So in this case, you can pick and choose whatever size suits you. Overall, I have found it to be super easy to assemble, really high quality, and I've had absolutely no dramas with it at all. For me personally, what I would suggest is if you're a newbie, you've never hatched brine shrimp before, perhaps don't go out and make this huge investment. Maybe you could go ahead and DIY a little one first, see if you regularly hatch out the brine shrimp. If you have success with it, experiment with these cheaper options first. And then if you find that you're hatching brine every single day, then it might be worth going ahead and investing in something like this. Something a bit more premium. I would suggest that this brine shrimp blender is kind of the more nice to have rather than the thing to get you going. That said, your Artemia blender or your brine shrimp hatchery is only as good as the eggs that you have and the conditions that you store them within. So I would also emphasize the importance of getting a high quality egg and storing them appropriately. I've been really happy with the purchase. There was absolutely no sponsorship at all. I paid full retail price for this and that other one behind me. And who knows, we might even have to pick up a couple more in the future. Overall guys, hopefully you liked this video. Hopefully it helped you make your decision on which brine shrimp hatchery you're gonna go with. If you did like it, it always helps me out to smash like, hit subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.